Hello, my name's Sam Breakgit and welcome to Byte Back. This is your podcast for everything to do with psychology, technology, and our society. On this episode of the podcast, my co-host Mags Tanev will be interviewing two guests on biohacking, discussing everything from intermittent fasting, what foods you should be eating, and how to better understand your body. And for our Weird Wide Web piece, we have a story regarding how YouTube will be limiting video quality around the world for 1 month. This episode is brought to you by Publicize. Publicize is a digital PR company that stands out from other legacy agencies. They don't charge large retainers or simply send out press releases when you have something to announce. Instead, they have a transparent and modular approach to PR that ensures you only pay for what you need. They refer to this approach as growth communications for everyone, and it makes them the default option for tech startups looking to take their first steps in PR. If you want more information, you can request a free PR assessment at publicize.co and find a tailored PR strategy that works for you. And exclusively for Byte Back listeners, for a limited time only, those who sign up for a 12-month package will receive 1 month free. To claim this promotion, visit publicize.co/BBB.
My first guest today is a perpetual adventurer, health nut, biohacker, and startup CEO who thrives on living outside of his comfort zone and pushing his physical limits. He has a degree in kinesiology with a focus in physiology, biology, and sports nutrition, and is the co-founder of dietary supplement and nutrition company True Nutrition. His name is Doug Smith. Doug, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So I wanted to start out by asking you to tell us a little bit about your own story and what it was that drove you to actually explore this field of nutrition and eventually create your own nutrition company.
Yeah, I think it pretty much originates, when I was a child. I was always a super physically active child. I didn't play, I guess ball bat sports that most kids play. I was kind of the kid that was in the dirt riding his bike and always being in the woods. So I guess it wasn't considered exercise, 30 some odd years ago, but I guess in relative terms it was. And I think what happened is pretty much when I was a kid, I could eat anything I wanted to. It didn't really affect me. And I went to university and that changed. Food and what I put into my system definitely started affecting me, from caffeine to food to what have you. Gained a bunch of weight, started seeing the issues that food can have like upon your biology. And that's kind of how it started. And I got really interested in human physiology and chemistry of the body and kind of changed my major to work with that. And then I think, when I was in my early 20s, the idea of, dietary supplements and manipulating kind of your nutrition really became my focus. And the issue I had is every time I went to a supplement store or ordered something, it always had all these other additives and ingredients that I just didn't want. However, I wanted that core-based material. And that's kind of how True Nutrition started. It was originally called True Protein, where we allowed, an end user online to mix or match any type of protein or dietary supplement or fat or carb without all these other additives. And we've been doing it for 17 years now.
That's really interesting that it's come from your own personal experience. But in terms of others also attempting to biohack their own biology, what kind of ways are you seeing people use nutrition to achieve this?
Yeah, I think, as of right now, in 2020, a lot of people think of biohacking as in what type of items or ingredients that are outside of really food can affect them. Anything from nutraceuticals to drugs, to caffeine, all types of stuff. And I think where I've really put my focus back as of recent is understanding that food, as in macronutrients and micronutrients, are really the foundation of, quote unquote, biohacking your health, how you think, how your brain works, from being let's just say a carb burner or a sugar burner to being fat adapted and operating on ketones instead of, carbohydrates, and the clarity it can provide. I think that is way more impactful than, let's just say, over consuming caffeine and dialing in your brain that way.
Yeah, absolutely. So what kind of technique specifically would you say we can kind of trust as, consumers that haven't necessarily done all of this scientific research I feel like there are definitely a lot of misconceptions out there, and there's always a fad diet that's trending at the moment until the next one comes along a few years later. Are there any sort of fail-safe nutritional techniques that you feel like people can adopt universally?
Yeah, 100%. I think, in the industry I'm in, although this might not be the best for sales, is that most people try to out-supplement bad nutrition or bad lifestyle. And this isn't as sexy and it doesn't sound as good as like, well, I have this capsule that has 20 different ingredients in it. The reality is that everything kind of starts at nutrition. And I think, regardless of the fad diets or this person's on a ketogenic diet, this person's vegan or what have you, I think at the core, you have to figure out what works for you and kind of what fits for your moral compass in life and what fits, I guess, your day-to-day activities. And I think ultimately, food-wise, nutrition is to really just stay away from things that are packaged or processed. And again, you could be on the scale of being, let's just say, on the paleo diet, which is super heavy in animal products and plants, or you could be vegan. But at the same time, regardless of the choice you make, it's really stop eating the processed stuff that's out there. Basically, the crap that's in the middle part of the grocery store. If you stick to the outer perimeter, that's usually where you're going to be better suited. Your brain will work better just because of your nutrition, regardless of adding anything else.
Yeah, that grocery store hack is actually a great one in itself. I'm going to remember that. So let's say that someone has their nutrition down, they're consuming majority whole foods that aren't processed, and they have that part of their life down, but they want some sort of extra boost, maybe to improve longevity, maybe to boost productivity. What kind of dietary supplements would you recommend, and which wouldn't you recommend?
Yeah, I think dietary supplement-wise, anything that's going to basically better dial in your nutrition first, as in, like, for instance, I live in Southern California. However, I am very pale, so being out in the sun for too long has negative repercussions, as in like skin cancer and whatnot. So I know, although when you're out in the sun, you synthesize, vitamin D, that's not ultimately healthy for me. So I have to take D3 exterior, through a capsule form. So I think it's really going to be dependent on, the individual. But I think ultimately taking like micronutrients that complement your diet is first. And, second is really manipulating maybe when you consume food or eat. I know for the last few years, I kind of went from grazing all day long until just eating only maybe once or twice a day and keeping that eating window shorter, where basically I'm kind of intermittent fasting, where like, for instance, it's noon right now and I still haven't had my first meal today. When we're done the interview, I will eat, and then probably 6 hours later I'll eat again. And usually when your body is given a break from digestion, clarity comes from that. So I think better in the morning. I'm more alert, I'm more awake, and this is without any type of CNS stimulant like, caffeine or something like that as well.
Yeah, I think intermittent fasting is definitely one of those biohacking techniques that's becoming more visible. I mean, we're seeing tech leaders like Jack Dorsey swear by it. I was reading that he only eats one meal a day on weekdays and then actually doesn't eat at all on weekends. But for those of us that might want to just get started and dip our toes into intermittent fasting, what kind of advice would you have?
Yeah, I think basically you have to, in a way, you're so used to your normal, most people eat breakfast as soon as they wake up in the morning. And I think sometimes it's an adjustment for a few weeks. But I think the best thing to do is basically just forget one of your meals. If you're typically doing a breakfast, lunch, and dinner, forget the dinner or forget the breakfast, and try to keep that window where you're actually eating, 6 to 8 hours. And the rest of the time, you're really giving your digestion and your body a break from that. I think that's the best way to kind of start. I know for myself, I feel better not consuming anything the first few hours after waking and then having a larger meal closer to the end of the day. But I know a lot of people that don't feel that way. When they wake up, they want to get food in, and then they eat food maybe, around 2 or 3, and then they're done for the day. So I think the best way to start is just to kind of pick your window and feel it out and go through those 2 or 3 weeks of maybe a little bit of hunger pangs. And also during that first meal or that last deal, don't count calories, just go for it. Eat as much as you possibly can to kind of satiate yourself.
Yeah, interesting. I think it's definitely one of those things that, like a lot of things in nutrition, it's very personal to the person that's actually undertaking it and their own preferences. But yeah, no, those are definitely some very helpful tips. So I think with all of the benefits that can come from biohacking through nutrition and using techniques like intermittent fasting, there are obviously a lot of positives that people can glean. But what would you say are some of the downsides to this, or what would you say are some of the dangers of people getting involved with this without the proper information?
Well, I think biohacking in general is in its own. There's some stuff that are very obvious and kind of tried and true. Like for instance, just eating healthy. You're gonna be hard pressed to have somebody tell you that eating healthy isn't going to do better for you. However, there is also some people that are kind of on the outer limits doing things, with pharmaceuticals or nutraceuticals that, what I always say is that every action has a reaction. So you might get something positive by using some drug that basically, recategorizes your brain and makes you work better or think better, but there's usually an opposite reaction in the other direction. There's obviously a lot of people that are microdosing different types of hallucinogens for different effects. And I'm one for always exploring and trying, but I think people have to realize that there are repercussions for that. And again, they usually go to the extreme before they go to the obvious, as in first try a few diets out there where you're not eating toxic polluting stuff and then go into the more extreme. So I think the negatives are really people trying to take the least path of resistance too quickly and going way too extreme too quickly.
Yeah, that's interesting that you say that, because I guess that's what's driving so many people to follow these diets, because they think it's going to be a quick fix and solution, when the reality is that a combination of regular exercise, a whole food healthy diet, and sufficient sleep is ultimately has to be the foundation.
Yeah.
And on top of that is what you build.
Yeah, that's the 95%. The last, all the little items of like the taking caffeine or something like that, those are all like the last 5%. And it's just interesting that most people put 95% of their energy on the things that aren't that impactful and could quite possibly be dangerous.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. And what do you think, on the whole, in terms of motives of people that are getting into biohacking, do you think it's primarily people that are seeking this quick fix, or do you think there are like genuine kind of motives of like wanting to try and feel better, wanting to optimize for longevity and things like that? What are you seeing as the general motives for biohacking and, around the field that you're working in?
I think it really depends on, the individual. Like I know for myself personally, years ago, I'm now in my 40s, and I really care about performance, and not just physical performance, but actually mental performance as well. Ultimately, when I have those things, I'm just generally a happier person. So for lack of better words, the goal of my life is just to be as happy as possible and lead a happy lifestyle. But I think, when I was in my 20s and 30s, I think a lot of understanding my physiology and my chemistry really had to do with physical performance and things that I wanted to accomplish and act upon. So all are valid, but I think as you get older, you care more about quality of life and longevity than actual performance. But I think overall, I think when people think better and they basically hack their science, ultimately they think better and they feel better. And when you feel better, you're just happier. And I know it sounds like pretty simple, but I think ultimately the goal of life is to be as happy as possible. So I think that's a big motivating factor, regarding like trying to biohack and understand how your brain works.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think it's potentially getting a bit of a bad rep because there are so many people that work in tech in Silicon Valley adopting these techniques, claiming that it's really helping them boost productivity. And the likelihood is that it is doing that. But I feel like, it shouldn't necessarily be the entire motive for most people. Like you said, if you're able to live longer and if you're able to have more mental clarity and feel generally healthier, then that should take more of a priority than putting more hours of work in the day.
Yeah, for myself, it's better for me to have a harmony or a balance of, work and play. I love both. However, I know when I do too much of one and not of the other, I start to become unbalanced. And then obviously my life starts to not fall apart, but doesn't feel as good as when it is balanced. And I think it's really dependent on people. I know when you're younger, it takes time just to learn who you are. and to understand like what kind of fulfills you. So I don't know. I never judge anybody. I just kind of look at everything kind of at face value at first to understand what people's motives are. But again, for myself, like if you start to get extreme, it's just making sure that there's extreme repercussions usually on the other side. And I think that's where people are losing it. And I think that's where a lot of the bad raps are coming from, where you hear the term biohacking. It's a very broad stroke. Biohacking for me is really based on nutrition and understanding different fundamentals that are important to me. It's not about consuming and manipulating drugs.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But on that note, I did want to ask you if there are any other biohacking techniques that you use outside of nutrition and fasting.
Yeah, again, this sounds like very obvious, but sleep is probably the most important. And I get it. It's not sexy. And everybody's like, well, I know that. However, even though people know that, they don't put time and effort into it. I know for myself, I don't set an alarm in the morning, but I set an alarm at night, where it's important for me to keep that consistency. And, you know, my bedroom is like kind of a sanctuary for sleep. Like I have blacked out windows a few hours before I go to bed and the sun starts going down. You know, I start not using typical blue lights or any type of light. I usually have like candles, or if there are lights on, I will wear like blue blocking sunglasses. And I think if people focused on their sleep, and some people, like for instance, I don't need 8 hours of sleep. I can get off on 6 hours of sleep. But I think when you really put energy and time into caring for basically that is a third of your life, that can be monumental in, you know, for lack of better words, biohacking and feeling better.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm not sure if you've read Why We Sleep by Matthew Walker.
I haven't read it, but I know about it.
Yeah, I listened to him on Joe Rogan's podcast and then listened to him on a bunch of other podcasts and read his book. And since then have taken sleep significantly more seriously than I was taking it before. And all of the things that you said, like making sure you have a blacked out bedroom, not looking at your screen before bed, it's really, really changed the quality of my sleep. And since I've been prioritizing it as much as I have, I've really noticed a difference. So I think that's just one of the ones which is so foundational to other areas of your life and can impact the other traditional, I guess, biohacking aspects that you should be focusing on, like nutrition and exercise. So I think as long as people understand that these areas are the foundations upon which to build, then I think that's the main thing.
That one's seemingly an easy one, but again, it's usually the easy stuff that people just avoid and don't put time and effort in. They want to do the more exotic or thinking something, you know, there's going to be a magic pill to something, but these normal things are usually going to be the 95%. You know, a few other things have been meditation for myself. Maybe 15 years ago or so, I really got into meditation. And for me, transcendental meditation really clicked in my brain and seemed very easy, you know, where basically you're just repeating a word that doesn't really mean much, but it allows you to focus on nothing but that word, and kind of everything else kind of disappears. And I know, like, you know, 10, 20 minutes twice a day has been super monumental for me over the years. And it's very tough to describe or to put into words with people like, well, why does it help you? And I'm like, well, I don't know. I just feel better and focused from it. And there's been a lot of studies that have been done on that for the reasons why, but that's another one that's most people are like, well, that's free and it's not in capsule form. I don't know if I want to try that, but again, it's like monumental for some people, as well as for myself. You know, the last like 10 years or so, I predominantly have been lower carbohydrate. And for some reason, when I basically use fat as a substrate for energy, my brain works better and I'm calmer, and overusing, let's just say, carbohydrates, which all kind of convert to glucose. Those two things have been awesome, very monumental for me outside of the normal realm of what is biohacking.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I guess with all of these, it's just going to take people trying them out and seeing what works for them, especially when it comes to nutrition. But with meditation, I think that you can pretty much categorically say that that is a beneficial technique for everyone that does it regularly.
Yeah.
And it's also something that produces results that you can't really achieve in any other way. Maybe with like some really strong psychedelic trips, but generally like the results that you can achieve with regular meditation are kind of incomparable to anything else that you might do to try and achieve those.
Yeah, and it's a tough one to describe the actions that come from it, and it's such a seemingly easy thing, but it actually is very difficult for most people, because we're so activated by everything today. There's so much filling our brains. We have these little computers in our hands every day, constantly looking at them. So to remove yourself and to detach, just even for 20, 30 minutes a day, it can have a monumental, restful effect on you.
Absolutely. Yeah, I completely agree. Okay, Doug, well, I think that's a great place to end the podcast, but thank you so much for coming on and talking about this with us.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
My next guest today is a board-certified urologist and expert in men's healthcare. He combines his expertise with cutting-edge technology to offer his patients individualized, state-of-the-art care, and in 2017, he founded Smart Men's Health, focused on optimizing male performance. He offers a personalized path to help men maximize sexual health, testosterone levels, and prostate health. His name is Dr. Tracy Gapin. Dr. Gapin, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me.
So I'd first off like to ask you if you could tell us a little bit about yourself. How did you get into the space of biohacking and helping people achieve their optimal selves?
Sure. So I've been a clinical urologist for almost 20 years now, and I've been taking care of men's health issues, low testosterone, sexual health issues, voiding complaints. But what I found was a universal theme among men is that men don't tend to take care of themselves very well. They're very reactive. They wait until a problem comes up, till disease sets in, and then they come to see me or another doctor for a quick fix. Men tend to be fairly simple creatures, and we simply want the easy magic pill to fix our problem, whether that's a Viagra pill, whether that's Lipitor, whether it's whatever pill it may be to fix our problem. Well, I went through my own health issues about maybe 5 to 8 years ago or so when I found that I had kind of hit a wall. I had gained a bunch of weight. I wasn't sleeping well. I was stressed out. I felt like crap, and I wasn't eating well, wasn't exercising, and I was stressed. And I finally realized I needed to see a doctor myself. And I went to see a medical doctor here in town, and he did some blood work, and I was about 25 pounds overweight. And it was very eye-opening to hear details of my own mortality and that I knew I needed to make a change. What was scary, though, was what this new doctor of mine told me. And that was I simply need to eat more vegetables, I need to exercise, and maybe take a statin. And that was it. And I left there that day scared of my own health, but also very much aware of the inadequacy of our medical system to take care of our health, and that we're very reactive and we just give a prescription medication to fix a problem. But there's really nothing geared toward optimizing our health and being proactive and being the best version of ourselves. And I realized that me as a clinical urologist, as a guy who handles men every day in my medical practice, I didn't have answers either. And so that really started my quest. And I went on a journey, if you will, learning about epigenetics, learning about functional medicine, precision medicine, where I use genetics to take a personalized approach to health. I learned about biohacking, if you will. And it really transformed my own health, and it transformed the way I care for men. And from that experience, from the personal experience I've been through, that has created Smart Men's Health.
Okay, yeah, that's really interesting. So I'm really excited to get into some of these methods that you use through epigenetics to help people biohack. But just for our listeners that might not be familiar with the term, can you give us a bit of a description as to what epigenetics is?
Yeah, sure. So epigenetics literally means above the genes. And what it really means is that your health, your life, everything about you is not just controlled by your genes. When I went through school, when I went to medical school back in the Paleozoic era, it seems, we were taught that your genetics dictate your health, and they dictate your risk of cancer and your risk of developing cardiovascular disease and your risk of dying early was all kind of set in stone. Well, what we've learned is that there are factors above your genes that have a dramatic effect on genetic expression. And so what that means is your lifestyle, meaning what you eat, how you sleep, how you manage stress, how you exercise, how you move, how you breathe, and even how you think. All these aspects of your lifestyle and your behavior directly affect your genes, which affects genetic expression, which affects your body's function. And so when we look at optimizing health, it's no longer simply set in stone. It's no longer your destiny that your genetics dictate what's going to happen, and that we can have a very proactive approach toward optimizing health by making changes based on your genetics.
Wow. So what kind of specific changes would you advise people that are keen to get started in biohacking through epigenetics?
Sure. So it really starts with a personalized blueprint. So as I mentioned, your genetics don't necessarily dictate your health, but they do dictate how epigenetics will affect you. So a good example or a way to describe this is a piano. And everyone may have similar, looking piano, but how you play the keys is dramatically going to affect the music that comes out. And so I'll give you an example. So let's just look briefly at one gene related to nutrition. So there's the ApoE gene, and the ApoE gene is a gene that regulates how your body processes saturated fat. And saturated fat's found in red meat, it's found in dairy, it's found in pork, steak, hamburgers, cheese, milk. And for some people who have a variant of the ApoE gene, they're going to do very poorly with high saturated fat intake. Other people may do just fine. And so when it comes to nutrition, there's a lot of guys who will come see me in the office and they're doing this keto diet or this paleo diet because they were told that's what they're supposed to do. And that's the latest and greatest fad diet now to lose weight and build muscle and optimize your health. But if they have this variant of this gene, then they're actually doing the exact wrong thing. And those guys want to limit saturated fat and focus more on the monounsaturated or the polyunsaturated fats like, salmon and olive oil and healthy nuts and other fats as opposed to the saturated fats. There's a gene related to carbohydrates and how your body processes them. For example, the PLIN1 gene is a gene that dictates whether you're going to lose weight with high complex carb intake or low complex carb intake. And we're not talking about cupcakes and donuts and candy and jujubes and Sour Patch Kids kind of carbs. We're talking about complex carbs like quinoa and broccoli and sweet potatoes and healthy vegetables like that. And so this gene will dictate whether you're going to lose weight better with a high complex carb diet or a low complex carb diet. And so again, this is a great example looking at nutrition of how there's no one size fits all. And epigenetics is really about personalizing your health based on your genetics and your genetic blueprint. And so when guys ask me, what should I be doing? My answer is, well, there's no perfect diet. We would individualize it to you so that we can tailor it to what you need. And this applies not just to nutrition, but it applies to micronutrient supplementation. It applies to optimizing your detox pathways of your liver. It applies to maximizing hormones, including testosterone and cortisol and thyroid and estrogen and growth hormone and melatonin. It applies to sleep, and it applies to athletic performance as well. So I really take a personalized approach when I'm working with clients to optimize their health. We use genetics as a blueprint, and everything starts from there.
Yeah, that's really interesting that you mentioned the prevalence of fad diets, because I feel like there's definitely a tendency in certain circles to kind of blanket state that certain diets are categorically the best option for everyone. And especially when people see a lot of results with the keto diet, losing a lot of weight very quickly, probably because they're in a caloric deficit and they're losing a lot of water weight, and it's actually, not the optimum diet for a lot of people. And you could say the same for a vegan diet or for a paleo diet. So it's interesting that it is such a personalized thing that people need to stay in tune with their own bodies and not just go off what the latest fad is.
Sure. Absolutely.
Yeah. And I wanted to ask you about the relationship between epigenetics and exercise.
Yeah, great question. So there are genes that look at multiple aspects of athletic performance. So number one, we all have a tendency to do better either with more of a strength training kind of program or more of an endurance type of program. And your genetics dictate whether you are going to do better with one over the other. And that doesn't mean you could only do strength or only do endurance training, but it would suggest which one you're going to do better with, or which one you're going to have the best results with. There are genes that look at your body's recovery capacity with exercise, or your fatigability, meaning how fast you hit that wall where you can't go any further. And there are ways through exercise technique as well as supplementation to optimize that effect and enhance your outcomes simply by knowing those features. There are genes related to risk of injury as well, whether it's cartilage injury or tendon-ish injury, and you can tailor your exercise accordingly as well. So it really, again, comes down to taking a personalized approach. And yes, everyone needs to exercise. Everyone needs to do some interval training, some strength training, and some cardio or endurance training as well. But your genetics can help you really fine-tune that and make it a program that's unique for you.
That's so interesting. I actually never knew that it was such a genetic factor whether you were better suited to endurance or strength training.
Yeah.
And so with the patients that you see, what would you say are their primary goals when they come to you looking to use these biohacking methods? Because right now we're seeing a big prevalence in Silicon Valley of a lot of people working in tech and working in high pressure jobs wanting to maximize their productivity. Would you say that's the main driver, or it's more of a longevity goal that people are trying to reach?
Yeah, great question. I see a lot of high performers at Smart Men's Health. Obviously, I'm focused on men. I do treat women as well, but mostly my focus is on men. And most of them are high performing. They're C-suite executives. They're entrepreneurs. Some of them are retired athletes. Some of them are executives in big corporations. And these guys need to be at their best. And I find so many men come in who are tired, they're fatigued, they have no energy, they hit a wall early in the afternoon, and they're gaining weight, they have that beer belly kind of starting, they're not sleeping well, they're stressed, and they just don't know what to do. And I hear this every day, guys that say the same phrase on a daily basis. They say, just tell me what to do. Because they want to feel better, they want to optimize their health, and they want to, get back to their peak in terms of, cognitive focus, in terms of energy, in terms of sexual health, and they just don't know what to do or where to start. So I see that a lot. I do have a few men who will come in specifically because we met at a longevity conference, and they want to, optimize NAD or autophagy or mitochondrial biogenesis or several other aspects of longevity, and we work on that. But most guys are the typical high-performing guy who wants to be at his peak and will do whatever it takes to get there.
Yeah, absolutely. And in terms of kind of other biohacking techniques that we're seeing, such as fasting, meditation, even there's been kind of over the past few years news of avid biohackers injecting themselves with certain enzymes to edit their actual DNA. Which of these biohacking techniques would you kind of advise people to universally follow, and which of them would you advise against?
Sure. So, there's a lot of science that's coming out on an almost daily basis now about longevity and age reversal, and it's really a fascinating time right now. One of the things I'll give you two things. But one of the things you mentioned is autophagy, and intermittent fasting is something that's really been shown to be beneficial when it comes to autophagy. So the way I describe autophagy to clients is it's your cell's way of taking out the trash. It's your cell's way of clearing out the debris from cellular processes that your cell needs to be able to function at its best. And you could think of a hoarder and think of all the debris and trash in a hoarder's house versus a house that's clean and organized. And that's what autophagy is all about. And animal studies show very clearly that improving autophagy does correlate directly with longevity through the SIRT1 genes, SIRT2 genes, and AMP kinase genes, and mTOR. And so we know that intermittent fasting is one of the best ways to promote autophagy. And so I've had so many men, it's amazing how I do nothing other than just start them on intermittent fasting. Like the first time we meet, we'll go through a detailed health assessment. And before I can get their labs back or their genetics back, or before we can really create a customized plan, I send them home with one piece of homework, and that is to do intermittent fasting at least 3 days a week. And it's amazing. It's fascinating how quickly just that one little biohack transforms their health. And so intermittent fasting is something that I love. And I'll make a disclaimer that this is not medical advice. You should talk to your doctor first, obviously. But I find that my clients who start intermittent fasting have tremendous results in terms of energy, in terms of mental focus. They lose weight almost instantly. And it really kind of gives them a jump start toward, moving on to bigger and more personalized aspects of the program.
Yeah, absolutely. And what kind of window are we talking about? Is it like an 8-hour eating window or?
Yeah, great question. So most of the guys who come in to see me, they don't even know what intermittent fasting is. They've never heard of it before. And so for those guys, I will start them with just basic intermittent fasting, which is a 16-hour fast and an 8-hour feeding window. And I'll have them do that at least 3 days a week to start. And then from there, we can move on to more advanced methods of intermittent fasting. And by that, I would get them down to a 4-hour eating window, at least 1 day a week if they can. And then I'll even have them do a 24-hour power fast once a week as well. So like for me on Mondays, I fast for 24 hours. So those are a couple ways that men can very easily implement intermittent fasting in their life with really very little personalization to start.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's something that certainly has been producing great results for a lot of people. But I do just want to ask you if there are any biological differences between men and women when we talk about intermittent fasting. I remember reading some studies that have said that men are actually better suited to fasted training in the morning, for example. And I know you're focused on men's health, but for women out there that might want to start it as well, is there anything that they should consider differently?
Yeah, you bring up a good point. Most of the work I do is with men. There have been some women who don't respond well to fasting. So again, I like to just make the disclaimer that I'm not here telling everyone to go out and do intermittent fasting. That I would talk to someone before you start doing that to make sure you're okay, especially women who have severe hormone imbalances. You want to get those kind of fixed first. But in terms of time of day, I have seen numerous studies that have been somewhat conflicting in whether the timing of it does matter in terms of exercise and results of your workout, whether you're doing it fasted or not. And I tell you, that's more of a personalized matter. I don't think there's any set in stone rule that says you have to do it at a certain time.
Yeah, absolutely. That's really helpful. So what kind of advice would you give for someone that perhaps wants to get started with biohacking but maybe doesn't have access to this kind of personalized plan that people like you are offering straight away? How can they dip their toes in and get started on their own?
Sure. I actually have a blog at Smart Men's Health. I have a fairly in-depth blog that we're adding to regularly, which is a bunch of free content around biohacking, epigenetics. Peptides is an amazing cutting-edge tool that's available now as well. You can learn all about that in the blog as well. But I really just recommend that people just read. And, there's a lot of great content that you can get out there for free. The key that I would emphasize is application of that information. There's so much out there. There's so much noise out there that sometimes it can get tough to know what's real and what's not. And so you take it all with a grain of salt, look at the science behind the articles you're reading. A big thing to focus on when you're looking at literature is to see what kind of study is it. If it's an observational study or if it's a population-based study, those studies are typically worthless. Those are typically not going to really give you very strong data because correlation doesn't necessarily equal causation. And, one thing may be associated with something else, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it causes it. And so looking at the literature, there's a lot of great studies out there, and I would just urge people just to read. The best way to learn is there's a number of great books out there. There's some great studies that have been published in the last year on longevity and epigenetics. And the key is just to really look at the data and make sure that it's a good quality study.
Yeah, absolutely. That's very helpful information. And just to finish off, you mentioned peptides. Are there any other tools that you find to be very useful in this area?
Absolutely, yeah. So first, peptides. Peptides are amazing. They are signaling molecules, and peptides are chains of amino acids. So they're naturally occurring molecules in the body. The body recognizes these signals already. And peptides are able to really achieve amazing outcomes related to weight loss, building muscle, cognitive improvement, boosting immune system, healing the gut, healing joints and musculoskeletal injury, boosting memory, skin care, hair loss, sexual function, libido. It kind of goes on and on. There are thousands of peptides that are being studied. About 70 of them are FDA approved and available for use here in the United States. And they're amazing in that you can get all of the great benefits that you're looking for with very little downside. And so I truly believe that over the next 10 years, peptides will become massive and they will eventually replace the pharmaceutical industry because they're precise. They have very unique and specific outcomes with very little downside. And they really are biologic in the fact that these are signals that your body is already used to. Your body already recognizes these enzymes, if you will. And so peptides is a cutting edge tool that is going to be much, much more popular in the next 5 to 10 years as people learn more about them. The next exciting area that I think would be worthwhile talking about briefly would be biometric tracking. You mentioned, with exercise. I have all of my clients wearing some sort of device. I personally use the Garmin Fenix watch. Some of my clients will use the Whoop or the Aura Ring, but I definitely have found that the Garmin so far provides the best data. And what I track with the biometric tools like this are heart rate variability, which is a direct sign of physiologic stress, and sleep. So first, looking at heart rate variability. Heart rate variability is simply the change or the variation in your heartbeat from one beat to the next. So when you think your heartbeat is 60, it's really not truly 60. It varies each beat to beat. So between one beat to the next, it may be 60.01, and then to the next one, it may be 60.03, and then 59.99. And that slight variation is what we refer to as heart rate variability. And heart rate variability is critical because it's actually a direct sign of your physiologic health, of your recovery status. And it helps us understand how, and this goes back to epigenetics, how your lifestyle, how your exercise, how your sleep, how everything around you is affecting your body's physiology. And so I use that with my clients on a weekly basis. I will sit down with them and go through their data for the past week, look at their heart rate variability, and talk about what may have caused changes in that heart rate variability and how we can optimize that. These tools will also show us data about sleep. Almost every guy I work with, they struggle with poor quality sleep. And they may think that they're sleeping okay, but then we put a device on them to actually track it. And we find that even though they may be sleeping 7 hours, they're actually getting very poor quality. And by that, I mean poor deep sleep and poor REM sleep, which are the two stages of sleep that are really critical for your body's recovery. And so tracking that, if you track it, you can manage it. And so by tracking sleep, I can see not just the quantity of sleep, but actually the quantity, or the quality. We can track both quantity and quality. And that helps us really fine tune our approach and optimize that for these men.
Yeah, it's interesting that you highlighted both of those areas, because I recently started using a Fitbit watch myself, and having those insights into the quality of sleep, how long you're actually sleeping for and how long you're just lay in bed awake. And then also the variability in resting heart rate is something that I wasn't really thinking about before, but now I'm kind of obsessively checking the app every single day. So yeah, I definitely would recommend everyone to invest in a tracking device.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting. I'll see men who come in and they're sleeping 8.5 hours a night, and then their deep sleep is only like 20 minutes. And that's terrible. And they think that they're getting good sleep, but in fact, they're not at all. And you would never know that without tracking it, without actually measuring it. So it's really helpful. And when I look at optimizing health, you have to look at the whole body, and you have to be able to track it and get real data and, make decisions based on that data. And that's why I love biometric tracking.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, well, Dr. Gapin, that's everything from me. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Weird Wide Web.
According to Bloomberg, as of last Tuesday, the 24th of March, YouTube will reduce the quality of videos around the world in an effort to ease internet traffic during the coronavirus outbreak. Users will still be able to watch in high definition if they want, but will have to choose to do so. YouTube is extending a policy it already instituted in Europe, where regulators have asked major streaming services, including Netflix and Amazon Prime Video, to reduce their bandwidth usage. The article goes on to state that use of streaming services has surged in recent weeks as hundreds of millions of people stay home to contain the spread of the virus. While YouTube viewing has historically spiked in the evening when people are off work, consumption is now more steady across the day, the company has said. Once again, thank you to our sponsor Publicize. If you want to find out more about their PR packages, the free resources they have available, or receive a free PR assessment, you can visit their website, and for a limited time only, Brains Byte Back listeners will receive 1 month free with a 12-month package at publicize.co/BBB. That is our show. Thank you so much for listening. If you want more episodes like this, then you can find more at sociable.co. You can also find great articles that we produce there. You can also follow us on any of your favorite podcasting sites: Spotify, iTunes, Stitcher, Google Podcasts. Wherever you listen to podcasts, we'll be there. But until next time, stay healthy.